Earlier this year, we had a post on our website that talked about the ostrich effect, which is the psychological tendency to avoid negative financial information by simply trying to ignore it. It's kind of like how an ostrich, when it senses danger, sticks its head in the sand, hoping that if it doesn't see the danger anymore, it is therefore not in danger anymore, which is not necessarily the case. So while if thinking about your retirement planning process fills you with anxiety, you might try to ignore it altogether. But in the long run, it's understandable, but it's not really ideal for your present or your future self. So this episode is going to be focused on helping you understand where to start when thinking about retirement and income. So if you're getting overwhelmed when thinking about your retirement income planning, this episode is going to go over 5 step-by-step instructions for you to take to help you overcome that overwhelming feeling you might get when you think about retirement income planning. Enjoy. Welcome to After the Paycheck, the series dedicated to helping people to and through their retirement process. I'm your host, Adam Bly. This week, I am here with Sam Lang.
Great to be here.
CEO and managing partner here at Rubino & Lang Wealth Partners. And
somebody said I had too many titles once.
Too many titles? We'll cut them down.
It's just Sam.
The man with the, just Sam. Just Sam I am. I've been reading Daphne, Green Eggs and Ham every night, and I think of you when I do it because the guy is Sam I am.
Hey, at least somebody's thinking of me.
He goes, hey. always thinking about you, Sam. This episode is going to be based on, so we've gotten some feedback from other articles that we posted earlier this year, and one of them we did was called the ostrich effect. And the ostrich effect is when people are afraid of something or they don't want to face something head on, they kind of stick their head in the sand, just like an ostrich does. So
sure, we've done it too.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. I'm guilty of it myself. I procrastinate when I know that it's a hard challenge and I'm not sure how it's going to go. I kind of tend to drag my feet, maybe turn away and try to avoid it. But we've learned, especially with retirement planning, that might not be the best thing to do.
Not a good solution.
Right. If you know that you need to address your retirement planning solution, but you're just kind of hoping, the day I retire, I'll just be able to look at everything and figure it out, that might be too late. So for this episode, we figured we'd go through step-by-step instructions to kind of help you overcome that overwhelming feeling of anxiety you might have towards retirement planning.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Good? All right, cool. So the first thing we have on this list is, number one, a mental mind shift, is moving away from that multitasking, I got to do a whole bunch of things at once and everything's on my plate, into just really focusing on what needs to be directly in front of you at that moment.
Task at hand.
Task at hand, right. And what is a way that we can do that?
At least for me, for myself, I tend to perform better when I write things down or at least remember what I'm supposed to do.
Yep.
So, every day, and probably a lot of people can relate to this, you go to work, you make a to-do list for today. So when it comes to retirement planning, write it down. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, I'll get around to figuring out how to, save more and spend less.
Right.
Well, it just doesn't happen by itself.
It's not on everyone's to-do list.
You're right. I mean, speaking of to-do lists, so when you write things down, I assure everybody can agree it gets done, right? So the other day, we're at home, the computer doesn't work, found out we need new batteries and for the mouse. I don't know if it was AA, AAA, but whatever it was, we had every other battery but that one. Yeah. Right? So I made a list and I'm like, all right, batteries. And then I said, I'm going to CVS, guys, what do you need? And I started writing this, laundry detergent, this and that. And of course I get to CVS and forgot the list at home.
Right.
So I literally bought everything that's on sale. I got the mouthwash two for one. I get home, I got everything but the batteries.
The batteries, yep.
So write it down. I think it goes in sort of really all aspects of life, but especially when it comes to, sort of getting the thing that you can do better, or how do you get there. But when it comes to retirement planning, write it down.
Yeah. Everyone has their own technique for whatever. I know that a lot of people are going digital for task lists and stuff like that, but Kristen makes fun of me because I still, to this day, if I start to feel overwhelmed, like you're just saying, I make that to-do list and I write it on Post-it notes. And for me,
same thing.
I write them and I put it in my wallet, and then when I get wherever I need to go, I pull it out and I will physically cross off whatever the task is, and then I get to throw away the Post-it note when it's done, and I feel so accomplished at the end of the day. Okay, I had a productive day if I'm able to throw this away at the end of the day.
Totally agree.
Yep. And I think that your brain is able to kind of, I don't know, it feels more accomplished. I don't know what the psychology is behind that, but there's definitely a psychology behind that where when you get that done, it works out well. So So what you should be doing right now actually is maybe write down the rest of these steps so that way you know what to do.
All right, here
for the
comes
rest of
step
this
two.
episode.
Here comes step two.
Step number 2 is think about where you're going to live. So before we start to do the rest of these steps here, it's really, location, 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 like some people say.
Yeah.
Why is understanding or thinking about where you're going to live important as like an immediate thought process for retirement planning?
So, I mean, this is not a retirement strategy, but certainly it goes to part of like how to prepare for retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So how many times have we heard when we're talking to somebody over the phone, or this is like the first phone call, hey, I'm going to downsize, so I might have 60% of my expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be vice versa. I mean, once in a while, we've actually found people, instead of downsizing, they go the other direction and their expenses get higher.
Oh, right.
You know? So I think, we talk about it a lot. You make sure that, hey, you have enough income to pay the expenses. Well, if we're going to project out the expenses, if they're going to be less, say 2 years from now after you downsize, we want to make sure that we're working with the right number.
Right.
Had a conversation with a client who's also a good friend of mine. He is 60. He's got a few years left.
Yep.
And he's a banker. He does everything like a banker. He does it right. They've always said, this house that we've raised the kids in, it's too big. We don't need it. Swim in the pool, twice a year. It's a waste of money.
Right.
Sick and tired of dealing with all the leaves and this and that. So they actually, instead of retiring and then downsizing, they made the motions. They went through all the steps. They found this great townhouse. It's, big enough. It's got a 2-car garage and all this.
Yeah.
So they did the numbers. They sold their house. They bought this new townhouse. They actually pocketed $400,000.
Wow.
So they're like, great, I got $400,000, at 5% return, I can spend this much more. But now they're into the house and they realize I'm not spending nearly as much because I'm not paying, $10,000 a year for the landscaper and the guy that's shoveling the snow. His taxes went down from whatever the number is to a much smaller number because the house is worth less.
Right.
Then he's like, wow, I don't have to pay for the pool guy to clean the pool and this and that. And what they all added up was, and then he said, Sam, this is going to sound like a lot of money, but I'm spending like $550 a month on my condo fees. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty good number.
Yeah.
But what you don't understand is that includes my insurance. That includes my water bill. And,
wow.
So Robin now just runs the water. She doesn't care about shutting it off. But it included
4
everything.
hours a day.
Yeah. And so on that note, when he was figuring out his retirement sort of projection, it wasn't just, hey, I got an extra $400,000 that I can use as an investment and live off of, but I'm actually spending substantially less than I was because I've downsized.
Right.
So that's where do you want to live has a lot to do with lifestyle. Do you want to be closer to the kids? Do you want to move to the Midwest because the cost of living is less, but you're far away from everybody? But a lot of times people just want to stay locally, but downsize and put a few bucks in their pocket.
Right.
And that's not a bad thing to go through and go through that exercise.
Right. And like it's all personal preference. Like you said, your friend's situation is, hey, the house is too big. We don't need it. So they downsized. And like you just said, there might be some people who are like, hey, I either want to stay where I am because the house is paid off and maybe their expenses will go down because the mortgage is just finally paid off and they get to just live in their house for the rest of their life. And then there's the people that might want to, you were saying that they kind of go into the luxury condos, right? But before we can do any of the rest of those calculations and figure out what you're going to need in retirement, you need to kind of understand or have an idea of where you want to be because that number is going to come back.
100%. I'd say probably more often than not, people, when they go into retirement, they're spending less for like housing costs. We had a conversation with a client the other day, and they live in the nice town, but they have this much smaller home down the Cape, but they love the Cape. That's like their slice of heaven. He's like, I just sold my house and I'm moving to the Cape full time. So there you go. You go from having 2 bills, 2 of everything, to 1.
To just 1.
Yeah. So it's a nice way to make sure that you can sustain your lifestyle in retirement.
Nice. So let's move on to the next step in this process, which is calculating your expenses. And this is where understanding.
Make sure you write that down. Step number 3.
That's right. Write it down. Write it down. First, think about where you're going to live and think about, again, roughly where that's going to be. And then you can calculate your expenses in retirement, I guess, right?
To the point where we were just talking about this example of downsizing, I mean, there's really 2 types of expenses. there's the essential expenses.
Okay.
That's your housing costs, that's your food, that's your health care, that's your, maybe your car payment, your maintenance. But then there's lifestyle expenses.
Right.
We all want to not just sit home and watch TV every day when we retire. We want to do things.
Right.
So that could be your entertainment expenses, your travel expenses,
right,
which probably down this year.
This year, but
this
we know
year,
that
right?
they'll be going back up soon.
We have, I like to golf, so maybe I play more rounds of golf. And
right.
maybe you like to play, different sports, and you like to ski, and you want to not just ski up in New Hampshire, but go to, go out to the west, go to Colorado and ski, and that's going to cost you more money.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that we have a good handle and a good grasp on the expenses. It's really important to not only know it, but write it down.
Right.
Yeah.
And this doesn't mean because, hey, we're trying to have you calculate your expenses. You don't have to right now. Again, if this is your first step towards overcoming that retirement planning anxiety, you don't need to know down to the last penny what those expenses are right now. But again, the idea is, number one, understand where you're going to live. And number two, once you kind of figure out what those essential expenses are going to be, now that you know where you're going to live and what your other bills are going to be, those lifestyle expenses, like you said, if you have, if you want to travel or if you have a hobby, if you're retired, you might do that hobby more now than you are when you're currently working.
Yeah.
Like you said, you're not golfing less in retirement. You're probably going to golf more if that's your thing.
100%. And I might be jumping ahead, but I think a lot of times when people say, and they come in and talk to us and they say, hey, are we on track? How much money do we have to save? Well, I have no idea how much money you're going to spend.
Right.
So really kind of working backwards really helps people understand. And in many cases, like we're talking about, the anxiety. Well, if you know you're going to spend $5,000 and you have this much money saved, and we can show you that even if we back in like taxes and inflation,
yep,
and we test that number, that $5,000 number, against what you've saved by taking $5,000 a month out, and we can actually show you after we've mathematically test that, hey, you know what, your money's going to last till 90 years old.
Right, right.
That anxiety is going to go down, isn't it?
Exactly right. Yeah. And that actually is step number 4, I guess, which is calculating your income in retirement. And there's different avenues or revenue streams that people can have in retirement. And we've talked about some previous episodes, but just to kind of recap for people that are watching for the first time.
There's many ways of getting income. You can invest in money and just take money out. That's income. You could put money in. I have some dividend-paying stocks. I see that dividend. I know exactly what it is every quarter. I get the check. I know what that's going to be. Some people use, real estate, rental income.
Right.
At the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have as many income sources as possible.
Right.
And if they could be guaranteed, that would be a fantastic thing.
Right.
You look back in the day, how sort of my parents retired, and we have this term here at the company called the 3-legged stool. Mm-hmm. And the 3-legged stool is more like 1.5 legs these days. But the 3-legged stool used to be, most people had a pension, because they worked for one employer.
Right.
That most employers had a pension. They had Social Security. And then if they needed additional monies, they could take that, make a withdrawal from their savings.
Right. Well,
today, pensions, I don't want to say a thing of the past, but very few people we know have pensions. And then Social Security, that's a whole different league itself. You got to make sure that you have a strategy to maximize your Social Security. But then now on the flip side, there's a buzz and there's talk about Social Security running out, especially with the new, all the money, all the stimulus money that's been going in and people being unemployed. Social Security is mostly funded by payroll taxes. Mm-hmm. So if there's less people working. So down the road, they're projecting that Social Security benefits that you are expecting is going to get cut by about 25, 27%. Okay. So we need to know that, right?
Right.
And then which really puts a lot of strain, essentially, on that last leg, which is your savings. Right. So that's why it's really so important to make sure that your money is, designed and put in the right places, et cetera.
Right. If I am, let's say, 60 years old and I am, again, I'm just starting to figure out what my income is going to be in retirement, and I'm like, Social Security, like, how do I know what it might change, but how do I know what I'm owed in Social Security or what I
Very easy.
Roughly get?
Funny that you asked that. So I went on socialsecurity.gov just
look at that. You got little printouts and everything.
just to actually look at my own stuff.
Yeah.
And back in the day, they would send it to you, once a year. But I don't know if they still do. You have to opt in to get a paper copy.
Okay.
But if anybody's watching this and you haven't done it, I would strongly encourage you to do that. It's ssa.gov.
Okay.
And then if you don't have an account, you have to create an account. All the private information or what have you. Right. But for a variety of reasons. One, you want to make sure that you check to see there's no errors. Okay. Just like you should check your credit report.
Yep.
I checked my credit report 2 years ago. I check my credit report all the time. But 2 years ago, I checked my wife's credit report. And I literally did one of these because there was an outstanding mortgage. It was literally my wife's first name, middle name, last name, same exact person. Lived in Lynn. I lived in Bedford.
Wow.
And there was like a $400,000 mortgage. I'm like, where did that come from? And when I talk about anxiety, I literally started to sweat like instantly. And it wasn't one of those horror stories that, it took me 2 years to get this.
Yeah.
It was literally same person, same exact name. And they had their mortgage on my wife's. So we got cleared up like that. But when you log into socialsecurity.gov, it shows all of your earnings for the last 20 years, 30 years. And listen, mistakes happen.
Right.
So if you made $100,000 and they only gave you credit for $50,000, you shortchange yourself on that Social Security payment.
Right.
So you want to make sure, number one, that all of your Social Security earnings are accurate.
Right.
But number two, it gives you a sort of a pretty good picture to budget. Mm-hmm. So my 62 number, let me see, I can take the glasses off to look at this. So you can start taking Social Security as early as age 62. Okay. And if I did that, I'm 55, so 7 years from now, I'm eligible for $2,200 a month.
Okay.
At full retirement age, I'm eligible for $3,150 a month. And if I prolong that to maximum of age 70, and these numbers grow about 8% every single year, I can get almost $4,000 a month. It's like 39 and change.
Wow.
So I just did some quick numbers.
Yep.
And I said, if I took my money at 62, because I feel like I should get my hands on it, and you multiply that number by 20 years, I would have received over my lifetime about $530,000. So $500,000.
Wow.
Which is a ton of money.
Yeah.
But if I didn't need that, and I strategically, and you were working with a planner, and you had a written retirement plan, and hey, you know what, let the Social Security grow because you can take money from elsewhere. And I started taking it at 70, and I do the same 20 years.
Right.
That's a total number of 940 grand.
Jeez.
That's a difference of $410,000.
Just by delaying it a little bit.
Just by making sure that you make the right choice.
Right.
So that's a really important thing to sort of keep in mind.
Because once you turn on Social Security, you can't turn it off, right? Like once you start collecting?
That's a trick question. I don't believe you can.
Right.
But why would you? There was other strategies, stop and suspend back in the day, but those things have changed a little bit.
Right.
But my point is, make sure that you make the right choice.
Right.
And don't take it just not to take it.
Exactly. Yeah. Just because it's available to you doesn't mean it's the right time to take it. That's a very good point.
I mean, on the flip side, I had a call the other day with she's not a client, prospective client, loved her job, still working. She was 72 and she didn't start collecting Social Security. So I said, well, you're not going to get more by waiting.
Yeah.
So I actually did some research, and she can go back and and they owe her 6 months.
Oh, cool.
But she didn't collect for 2 years.
Wow.
So I think she lost a year and a half's worth of benefits. I think. So that's you don't want to make that mistake.
Exactly right. So that's why it is important. Like you said, ssa.gov is where you can go to kind of calculate what that would be. But this kind of leads into tip number 5 or step number 5, which is making sure that your portfolio is well balanced. Because like you said, if you see at 62 you can get X amount of money and you just think that you need that money right away because you haven't done your due diligence and figure out what your other income streams are in retirement, and hey, if I take Social Security now, I'm missing out on 8% growth for these next couple of years.
Or you just take it and turn around and put it in the bank and pay taxes on it, and then earn
0.5%,
point something, right?
And that's on a good bank right now. Yeah, that's a very good point. So this again leads us into tip number 5 or step number 5, which is making sure your portfolio is well balanced. And again, this is something that we've talked about in previous episodes. So if you don't have a well-balanced portfolio, what are some things we could be exposed to?
A lot, So, the market, think about just this past year. Everything was chugging along great. come February, you hear of this pandemic thing, COVID-19 and this and that, and you're like, well, what's, boom, all of a sudden come end of March, beginning of April, you know, people weren't prepared.
Right.
So a lot of people panicked, and I mean, most accounts probably went down some double digits. I can't imagine how many people said, I'm not going to let this be another 2008 again. I learned my lesson, and they took everything out, and it's been sitting in cash since. Well, what's happened since? I mean, the market's been cranking. Right?
Crazy, yeah.
So at the end of the day, nobody knows what the future holds. Market volatility is going to be here forever and ever.
Right.
And that's why when you say having a well-balanced savings plan or portfolio for somebody that's 35
right.
is a lot different than somebody that's 62 and ready to go out in 2 years.
Right.
So the things that could really hurt that person, in my opinion, the biggest thing that can hurt somebody, and we've talked about this in past episodes, is the sequence of returns risk.
Right.
Which simply means nothing more than you have too much of your money going like this, and then all of a sudden you stop working, you retire. Here we go, I'm going to enjoy life. Yep. And you start withdrawing money, but instead of doing this, your portfolio is doing more of this.
Right.
And it's a double whammy because you're losing value all by itself, but then you're also pulling money out.
Right.
And that's not a good way to start your retirement. You know, that's kind of like a recipe for disasters. And we have all these studies, what happens if you go back the last 20 years and this happened versus that happened. So when you talk about a well-balanced portfolio, and, you know, sort of at our firm, between John, my partner, and Ryan, my other partner, and the three of us, we have sort of three brains working together to pull all these strategies together for clients. And really what it comes down to is just having money designed for specific purposes.
Right.
You know, money in the bank for liquidity, to make sure that you have 6 to 12 months worth of expenses in liquid savings. We're not going to complain about how little interest we're getting, because that's not the reason why the money's there.
Right.
Then we want to absolutely have money in growth-oriented items, investments. I have money in a Fidelity account, fairly aggressive.
Yep.
You know, goes up and down, and I expect that.
Right.
But I don't want to draw from that if it's going down.
Right.
Now, I don't need to because I'm still working, because I'm getting a paycheck. So for those that are near retirement or are in retirement, you need to have that third bucket, which is the income bucket. And you need to make sure that that's going to give you, at a minimum, the essential expenses that we talked about. No matter what happens, we know if we need, you know, $3,000 a month to pay the essential expenses, this amount of money in this third bucket is going to give us that. Perfect. And then maybe you can get some additional money from the growth bucket for those lifestyle expenses.
Right. So that's why working with a financial advisor is a good idea, because they help you, again, but make sure that you have that balanced portfolio structure.
100%. You know, our firm is a full wealth management company. I deal with most of the safe stuff. I'm that old dinosaur that, you know, thinks, hey, safety is paramount, and you need somebody on that team.
Right.
And then we have John and Ryan to help you decide, you know, hey, this is how we take on some risks. These are the portfolios that you can put together. So having a financial team that is really focused on helping people retire.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to say it's better, but you should think about having that, especially if you're watching this because you're worried about and you have some anxiety about retirement planning.
Right. Yeah. And you took the words right out of my mouth. The whole purpose of this episode was, again, here's step by step to come over that anxiety. And if you're still feeling anxious, talk to a professional and someone that you can have that trust with and that you know is working in your best interest, because they're taking a look. And it's not just someone that's like, oh, hey, I'm
going to help you make more money. Boom,
exactly. Right. Someone that's going to say, hey, let's take a look at where you're going to be living, what your income is, what your expenses are, and a whole, you know, outlook at your entire situation.
And we have some great tools on the website.
We do.
Yeah.
Yep. And I was just going to drive people there. Sam, thank you so much.
You got it. You should have wrote it down.
I should have you do the exit here. Yeah. If you aren't already after the paycheck right now, head over there, and on the right side there's a little link that says helpful worksheets. Click on that and you can actually download. We have an income gap calculator worksheet. We have a monthly budget worksheet. And these are all tools that are designed to go in line with this episode here that you can download and fill out that information that goes along with what we were just talking about, that helps you again, start to see the situation and overcome that anxiety that comes with retirement planning. Again, if you're
You
someone
don't
like
want the
me,
ostrich effect.
exactly. That's and you don't want to be like me. Don't have the anxiety that I have. Sam, thank you very much for
Hey,
taking
great
the
being
time.
here. Always a lot of fun.
This was a really good episode, I feel, to really, again, address those people that are, if you're already in retirement, this is a good episode to kind of reaffirm those things. But if you are nearing retirement and you have not taken these steps yet, I would highly recommend you at least start to look at these things, write things down, calculate those expenses. Until next time, take care.